When night falls, the darkness starts to speak. Between each breath and the silence, there are whispers no one was meant to hear. This is Night Whispers, where the dark has a story to tell. I was 22 when all of this happened. I had just graduated college and was stuck between jobs, taking whatever small tasks around town, paid cash, babysitting, house cleaning, running errands. A woman I had dog sat for in the past recommended me to a neighbor's friend, a man named Craig, who needed someone responsible. At the time, it sounded like one more easy gig that could help me get through the month. Craig called one afternoon and explained that he would be out of town for a week. He needed someone to stay in his home and watch his golden retriever, Max. He said Max was anxious and didn't do well when people only stopped by briefly. The pay he offered was better than any dog-sitting job I'd had, so I said yes. We arranged to meet 2 days later at his house. When I met him, Craig looked like any average man in his late 40s, tall, thin, wire-rimmed glasses, a simple windbreaker. He seemed a little too friendly, but nothing about him struck me as unsafe. His house was tucked deep along the wooded edge of town. Inside it felt neat, but very outdated, with beige carpet floral curtains and a general early 2000s vibe that made the new appliances stand out strangely. Craig went over everything I needed to know: when to let Max out, where he kept the spare key, what I was allowed to use from the fridge. He told me to stay in the guest room near the living room on the first floor. I started the job that Monday, and for the first 2 nights, nothing unusual happened. Max slept by my feet, and the house stayed completely quiet and ordinary. Each night I watched a little TV, took Max for his usual walk, and then headed to bed. But the third night felt different. I was sitting on the bed scrolling my phone when something on the dresser caught my eye. A digital alarm clock, black plastic, bright blue LED display, sat beside the lamp. It looked too new compared to everything else in the room, almost like it didn't belong there at all. I kept staring at it because the more I looked, the more out of place it seemed. Everything else in the room was old, worn, or dated, yet this clock looked almost brand new. I didn't know why I leaned closer, maybe the way the lamp's light reflected off its front panel, but the moment I shifted, I noticed a tiny circular pinhole right above the glowing numbers. At first, I assumed it was a sensor, but then I realized the hole was angled directly at the bed. The realization made my stomach drop. I had heard of hidden cameras disguised as alarm clocks, but I had never seen one up close. Something about the way the light hit it made the pinhole look darker, deeper, and far more intentional than any normal sensor should. I picked the clock up, surprised by how heavy it felt. There was a faint humming sound inside, like a small fan spinning. When I turned the clock toward myself, I stared directly at the pinhole. At that exact moment, Max, who had been lying by the door, suddenly lifted his head, whining uneasily, as if he sensed something behind us. His ears angled toward the hallway. Then I heard a door closing somewhere deeper inside the house. Not the front door, but somewhere down the hall. The sound froze me in place. Craig wasn't supposed to return until Sunday, and it was only Wednesday night. My heart pounded so hard that I could feel it in my throat. For a long moment, I didn't even breathe. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps approached the room. I set the clock down and rushed to the door, locking it just as the footsteps stopped outside. Craig's voice came through a second later, strangely calm but slightly breathless. He said he had left something inside the room the last time he was home and needed to grab it. I didn't respond. He quickly added that the device I saw wasn't what I thought, that it was just a motion sensor for Max. I backed away from the door, covering my mouth, shaking. When I still didn't respond, Craig's gentle knocking became sharp pounding. His voice shifted from calm to angry, ordering me to open the door. Max barked wildly at the noise, which only made Craig more agitated. He yelled that if I didn't open the door, he would get the key and call the police to say I had broken into his home. I glanced at the window. It was low enough to climb through, but locked. My hands trembled so badly that it took me several tries to open the latch. Behind me, Craig kept pounding, shouting threats that echoed through the walls. Max barked non-stop. I finally shoved the window open, climbed through awkwardly, and dropped onto the cold grass outside, scraping my hands on the way down. Max whined from the window ledge but didn't jump out. I ran across the side yard down the gravel driveway and reached the main road far enough away that the house was no longer visible. My hands shook as I called my mom, telling her to pick me up immediately. When she arrived 15 minutes later, I hid behind a cluster of mailboxes, terrified Craig had followed me. I stayed at my mom's house that night and barely slept. The next morning, I blocked Craig's number and called a lawyer. The lawyer told me that without the device itself, or recordings proving it was a camera, pressing charges would be nearly impossible. Craig could claim it was a harmless sensor, and without physical evidence, it would be my word against his. I couldn't bring myself to return for it. As days passed, nothing happened to Craig. I never received payment for the 3 nights. The woman who recommended me stopped replying to messages, and I never learned whether she knew anything about his behavior. For weeks, I woke from nightmares imagining a camera staring at me from across a dark room. Every small electronic device suddenly felt suspicious. I began checking everything in my own apartment: clocks, smoke detectors, outlets, picture frames. I even opened devices to look for hidden lenses. I didn't find anything, but the anxiety stayed. It felt like a part of my privacy had been torn open, and I couldn't seal it back. I no longer trusted unfamiliar objects, especially anything with a tiny, dark circle staring from its surface. Even now, I sometimes remember the moment I looked into that tiny black pinhole and then heard a door closing behind me in a house I truly believed was empty. That memory still crawls under my skin, and deep down, I can't shake the feeling that Craig may have been inside the house the entire time, silently watching me through that little hidden lens. I booked the Airbnb in late September, exactly 1 week before Emma and I planned to visit her sister. Her sister's town was about a 3-hour drive from where we live, so finding a place that was both affordable and close was our top priority. When I saw the listing for an old 2-story house with a wraparound porch, I thought I had found a cozy, quiet place for a few days away. I chose the house for several reasons: reasonable price, good location near Emma's sister, many positive reviews, and warm, pleasant photos. The house had a wraparound porch, soft yellow lighting in the living room, and wooden floors that looked almost fairy tale-like. There was only one small detail in the description that I didn't pay much attention to. The host mentioned the basement storage room was off limits for personal reasons. I had stayed in many places where owners kept certain rooms locked for personal belongings, so I didn't think much of it. But when we drove up just before sunset, the house looked older than in the photos. The porch floorboards were worn, the paint faded, giving off a strange feeling. Still, we reassured ourselves that online pictures were often edited to look brighter. What made me hesitate more was the house's location. It stood completely isolated, with only one other house visible far in the distance, surrounded by narrow roads and dark tree lines. The host, Alan, was already standing on the porch when we stopped the car. He was tall, slightly hunched, with thin gray hair neatly combed. His appearance made the quiet setting feel even more unsettling. He wore a neatly pressed flannel shirt tucked into his pants. Alan smiled politely, but it didn't seem to reach his eyes. His gaze lingered longer than normal when shaking our hands. His voice was friendly, but there was a subtle strictness underneath, as if he wanted to keep everything under his control while showing us around. He led us into a hallway that smelled faintly of dust and something sweet, almost like candle wax. The living room had a large sofa facing an old television. The kitchen was clean but outdated. Upstairs, the only bedroom had a large bed under a ceiling fan and a small dresser with a mirror. Everything looked fine, but not completely comfortable. On the way back downstairs, Alan stopped in front of a door near the kitchen and tapped the large padlock hanging on it. His tone turned more serious as he said that room must always remain locked, as it was his personal storage space and we had no reason to go down there. He didn't smile this time. He simply showed us where the towels were and wished us a pleasant stay. After he left, Emma and I unpacked, made some tea, and sat on the porch listening to the crickets and the rustling leaves. The quiet was eerie, no cars, no voices, just complete stillness. When we went to bed, I felt the silence was almost unsettling. Near midnight, I heard a soft noise, like something dropping beneath the floor. I lay still for a moment to hear if it happened again, but it didn't. I told myself it was probably the house settling or the wind shaking something. The next morning, we got breakfast in town, walked around, and met Emma's sister. By the time we returned, it was getting dark, and we made a simple dinner and watched a movie to end our first day. Around 2 a.m, I woke up to use the bathroom. When I started walking back up the stairs, I froze. From the basement came a dragging sound, as if something heavy was being pulled across concrete. The sound lasted several seconds, stopped, then happened again. I wondered if Alan had come back, but he had clearly said he wouldn't return during our stay. I stood there listening until the noise completely disappeared, then quietly slipped back into the bedroom. I whispered to Emma, asking if she heard anything, and she whispered back that she had. We stayed awake for nearly half an hour, listening for any other sounds, but the basement stayed silent. Still, the uneasiness lingered until sunrise. The next night was worse. After a long day of walking, we expected to sleep well, but around 2:30 the noises started again, this time footsteps. 4 or 5 steps, then silence, then 3 more. The pauses were so long they felt intentional, like someone was listening for us from underneath the floor. Emma whispered she heard faint breathing between the steps, and both of us barely slept until morning. On the third morning, the atmosphere inside the house felt heavy and uncomfortable. Although we tried to stick to our sightseeing plans every time we returned, the air felt strangely stagnant. I approached the basement door again. It was still locked, but when I leaned in, I smelled a damp, sour odor seeping from inside. It made my stomach twist. That night, the noises started earlier, around midnight. At first, it was a soft, metallic sound like metal scraping or tapping against something. Then came the footsteps again, sometimes close, sometimes far, going on for nearly an hour. Emma barely spoke before bed, her face full of anxiety. I didn't know how to reassure her because I felt just as uneasy. On the 4th night, everything escalated. Emma stopped brushing her hair and stared at the smoke detector above the bed, asking if it looked strange. At first, I didn't notice anything, but when I stood on the bed for a closer look, I saw a tiny black dot, shiny and round, different from the surrounding plastic. A cold shiver ran down my spine immediately. I pulled up a chair, opened the device, and found a small battery-powered camera with its indicator light still on. Emma sat on the bed, pale and speechless. I searched the entire room and soon found another small hole near the mirror, a second camera lens. Both were aimed directly at our bed. That was enough. We had to leave immediately. We didn't say another word. We threw our clothes into our suitcases without folding anything, desperate to get out. Without messaging the host, we rushed to the car and drove straight to the nearest gas station. There, we called the police, explained everything, and asked them to come with us back to the house. When the police arrived, they easily opened the front door since it wasn't locked. Technically, we were still allowed inside because we had paid for 4 days. The 2 officers entered with us and immediately seized the cameras, memory cards, and any recording devices they found. They asked us to describe everything from the first strange noise to the moment we discovered the camera. When we mentioned the noises from the basement, the officers checked the door. To our shock, it was now wide open, even though Alan insisted it always remained locked. Inside was complete darkness. The officers turned on their flashlights and went downstairs, while we stayed at the top, hearts pounding, sensing something was very wrong. Just seconds later, we heard shouting and hurried movements from below as if they had discovered something unexpected. A moment later, they called us down and asked if we recognized the man they had found. It was Alan. He had been hiding in a small closet. Inside the closet was a monitor apparently connected to the house's hidden cameras. The police arrested him almost immediately for criminal trespass and invasion of privacy. We didn't have to appear in court. Our statements were sent directly to the prosecutor. Airbnb later offered us a voucher as compensation, likely hoping we wouldn't speak publicly about what happened. But it didn't make the experience any less horrifying. Since then, both Emma and I have been deeply affected. We no longer trust rental homes, especially those with locked rooms or basements. Now we only stay in hotels for safety. And sometimes when I think back to the sound of something dragging in that basement, a cold shiver still runs down my spine. My name is Joe, and this happened about a week ago. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with my roommate Eric. We didn't know each other beforehand. We met through a Facebook housing group. My first impression of him was simple, quiet, polite, and a bit awkward. That made me think he'd be an easy person to live with, someone who wouldn't cause trouble or disrupt the peace in the apartment. When he came to check the place, Eric barely spoke besides answering a few basic questions. I wasn't looking for a friend, just someone responsible who could pay rent on time and not treat the apartment like a dumpster. Everything seemed normal back then. I genuinely believed I had chosen a decent person to share the space with, and nothing felt off at all during those first interactions. For the first couple of months, life went smoothly. Since our work schedules were opposite, my 9 to 5 and his night shift, we hardly ever crossed paths. I'd leave in the morning while his door was still shut, and at night, I returned to an empty hallway. We would occasionally meet in the kitchen or living room, exchanging a few words before going back to our separate routines. Things stayed uneventful until little signs started appearing. One night after work, I walked into my room and saw my closet door wide open. I always close it in the morning, so the sight immediately bothered me. I forced myself to shrug it off, thinking maybe I just forgot. But even as I tried to dismiss it, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. A few days later, I noticed the chair at my desk had been turned in a direction I never leave it. Again, I told myself I must have been careless, but deep down I felt something was wrong. That sense only grew stronger one Saturday morning while I was cleaning when I looked up at the corner where the wall met the ceiling and spotted a tiny black dot. Curious, I stepped closer and froze. It wasn't a screw or a bug. It was a tiny wireless camera stuck to the wall with a cheap adhesive pad facing my bed. My hand shook as I pulled it down. There was a slot for a memory card, but it was empty. The realization that someone had been filming me in my own bedroom made my skin crawl and my stomach twist. Only Eric had access to my room when I wasn't home. The apartment was quiet at the time his bedroom door shut. I stared at it, feeling my heart hammering as the horror of what the camera could have recorded sank in. Eventually, I couldn't hold back. I turned his doorknob and slowly stepped inside, even though part of me felt like crossing a line. His room was dark and stale, smelling of old food and dirty laundry. The blinds were shut tight, even though it was midday. Clothes were thrown everywhere, and his desk was buried in papers and unopened mail. I searched around cautiously, half expecting to find another camera or recordings, but there was nothing obvious, just overwhelming mess and neglect. Still, the uneasiness only grew. I needed proof he was the one who placed the camera, so I hid it in my nightstand drawer underneath a pile of socks. If he came looking for it, I would know. For 2 nights, nothing happened. I started wondering if I was overthinking everything, even though the dread never fully went away. But on the 3rd night, something woke me around 3 in the morning. At first I didn't know what it was, but then I heard a faint sliding sound, wood against wood. It came from the nightstand right beside my bed. I cracked my eyes just slightly, and in the dim light filtering through the blinds, I saw a figure standing there. It was Eric. He was bent over, rummaging through the drawer where I had hidden the camera. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I stayed completely still, pretending to be asleep. After a few seconds, he froze. He didn't move at all. Then, he slowly turned his head toward my bed, staring directly at me. I kept my breathing even, but inside panic surged like ice water. Suddenly he whispered, "I know you're awake." The coldness in his voice made my entire body lock up. I sat up quickly, anger overtaking fear. I demanded to know why he put a camera in my room. Eric stared blankly and said he thought I'd been stealing from him and he needed proof. His explanation was twisted and ridiculous, but he said it with a straight face. I shouted that it made no sense, pointing out that the camera was aimed at my bed, not his stuff. He kept insisting I was overreacting. I told him I'd report him to the landlord and maybe even the police. My voice shook, partly in rage, partly in fear. He didn't show remorse. He just stood there with that unsettling emptiness in his expression. I yanked the drawer open, grabbed the camera, and held it up, telling him this was all the evidence I needed. Then I stormed into the kitchen, lifted the trash can lid, and threw the camera inside, hoping it was destroyed. I warned him never to go into my room again. He stood in the hallway, fists clenched at his sides, saying nothing. Then he turned and walked back into his room. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed on the couch, TV on low volume, just to fill the silence. Every tiny noise made me jump. When the sun finally came up, I went to check the trash can. The camera was gone. That discovery hit me harder than I expected. It meant he'd taken it back, probably before I even realized he had left his room again. I reported everything to the landlord the same day. He said he'd look into it, but nothing has changed. Eric still lives here. We don't speak. But the way he looks at me has shifted. His eyes are empty, but calculating, like he's waiting for something, maybe for me to slip up, maybe for a chance to intimidate me again. I don't know. His excuse about thinking I was stealing was obviously a lie. I have no idea what he really wanted to record or what he planned to do with the footage. That thought keeps me awake at night. Every time I lie down, I can't help but wonder if there are other cameras hidden where I haven't checked yet. I searched my entire room, every corner behind the furniture, inside vents and outlets under the bed. I couldn't find anything else, but the lack of evidence didn't give me peace. Instead, it just made my paranoia grow stronger. The feeling of being watched lingered in the air like a shadow that followed me to sleep. Last night I heard footsteps in the hallway. They stopped right outside my door. For over a minute there was nothing but the faint creaking of the wooden floorboards under someone's weight. No knocking, no whispering, just someone standing there unmoving. I held my breath and didn't dare shift even an inch. Eventually the footsteps moved away. but the terror stayed. Living in this apartment feels like sharing a space with something unpredictable, something not quite right. Every night I wonder what Eric is thinking, what he might do, and whether I'll even see it coming if something escalates. I'm looking for a new place now. I'm also researching whether I can press charges for invasion of privacy, but I have no real evidence, no photos of the camera, no recording of our confrontation, nothing in writing. It feels like everything that could have helped me is already gone, leaving me with only my word against his. I honestly don't know how this will end. All I want is to get out before things get worse. As for Eric, I don't want to understand him, don't want to know what else he's capable of. I just hope I can move out safely, leave all of this behind, and never think about what might have been filmed ever again. Thank you for staying until the end. If the dark didn't scare you away, maybe you belong here. Subscribe to Night Whispers and let the darkness find you again next time.